Now we'll talk about how ideas between sentences are generally connected. The primary way that sentences are connected is the use of conjunctions. Conjunctions are words that join one sentence with another sentence. In ASL, we have several conjunctions that are very different from the conjunctions we find in English. The first is this sign, and that sign simply means without warning or suddenly. So if you were saying that you were walking down the street and it started raining out of the blue, then you might sign to show that suddenly it started raining. Another sign that we have is this sign. Now this has nothing to do with the emotion of frustration, which is signed this way, but it has to do with the feeling of being unable to move forward. You were trying to do something, you went to the store, but the store was closed. Another one is, this sign means something similar to the sign wrong, in that it's unexpected, but it has a more positive connotation. You passed by the teacher's office hoping they would be there, and poof, they were there. You didn't think they were going to be, but they were. You played the lottery, and poof, you won. So that it's something unexpected, something that just turns out without you expecting it. Similarly, you could be doing one thing and then find out something else. Perhaps you kept knocking on the door of a house, but then wrong house. I found out that it just so happened that it was the wrong house. Another conjunction is simply the sign happen. This means something a bit different than the word in English, in that it's a connecting idea. So you're doing one thing and then you're doing something else. But it also can convey this sense of surprise, that you didn't know what was going to happen, but it turned out that something positive or negative happened. Again, it's very difficult to tease out the difference between this sign and this sign and this sign. This is a bit more negative, this is a bit more positive, and this is a bit more neutral, but as you see them in context, you begin to get a feel for the specific meaning that they have. Another sign, not to be confused with the first one that we went over, is the sign with a twist. And that means that the plans didn't work out. You were going to do something similar to frustrate, but an accident happened. And, let's say you thought you were going to be in the Olympics, but broke leg. It didn't work out because you broke your leg. Another one you have is the sign finish. Now we know that finish is a verb that's an auxiliary verb that comes before a noun or at the end of the sentence. But when you do it like this with your eyebrows raised, it means and then the next thing, or and after that, this is what happened. And then. It's the closest sign that ASL has to the sign and then. We also have the sign next in a list. This is used in a more formal setting when you're talking about one thing and then you want to move to the next topic. Similarly, you can move to the topic to the side. It just depends on if you've sort of visualized your topics as a list or you visualize them as a row of things. If they're a row of things, then you can move this way. If you visualize them as a list, then you're going to move down. You can also push a topic to the side. So if you've been talking about something, you want to change the subject, you could say, and then let's talk about something else. You could also use the sign OK to mean all right, let's get started. Okay, I'm about to talk about something new. Now, these last four are used more in formal settings. If you're sort of telling a story or everybody's looking at you to do sort of a monologue, you just talking by yourself, maybe in a classroom, maybe if you've got friends around and they're all looking at you while you tell a story, then you might expect to do something because it has a feeling of a little bit more formality, whereas the first conjunctions that I listed happen frequently just in the middle of sentences while you're talking to people, in normal conversations. Another way to connect ideas is the use of rhetorical questions. Now, notice that really the rhetorical question is sort of a misnomer, because when we talk about rhetorical questions in English, these are questions that we ask and no one answers. If I say, "Do you think I'm an idiot?" I mean, I'm not going to say I'm not an idiot. I'm just going to leave the question, and you're supposed to say, the people who you're talking to don't answer it. They just say, "No, you're not." Um, a rhetorical question is a question you ask to make people think, or that people already know the answer to, so that you don't need to answer it. In ASL, we use the term rhetorical question. Maybe it would be better to call it a focusing question or something like that. They're used to give information that's you're stressing, that you're emphasizing. And you have one sentence and you want to say something else, and you're going to emphasize the information in that sentence. You raise your eyebrows and pause while you form the question, and then you give the answer. They're always giving new information. They're not giving background information. Here are some examples. Excuse me. I read the book because the teacher said there would be a quiz. Or, I'm going to talk about the problem that I had last week. Remember, this sign in ASL is a verb, not just a noun to mean a story, but to tell a story or to talk about something. So I'm going to talk about my problem last week. And then finally, next year, I'm going to go to Australia. We use a rhetorical question because we're emphasizing where we're going. Now, frequently you're going to see that rhetorical question, why? That's very common. Why either sound like this or why sound like this. Very common. You're also going to see what as a connector. You might say, and next I buy what? New car, right? What as a connecting item. Less frequently you're going to see where, who, and when. You can see these things, but again, only if you're emphasizing. Beware and be very careful about using a rhetorical question every time you hear the word at, for instance. Last week I was at the mall. Don't sign, last week I go where mall. That's silly. Unless you're emphasizing the mall, like something really crazy about the mall. It's silly. You would just say, last week I go mall. That's all. Or I went to, I visited France last year. You don't want to use when last year unless you're trying to emphasize that something about it was last year. Rhetorical questions are very overused by beginning ASL students, so be careful about that. Finally, another way to connect ideas is using listing. So if you have two or more items you want to talk about, maybe you're going to talk about your two jobs. Maybe you work at McDonald's and you work at the mall. Well, then you may list them. This is when you want to refer back to them. You're going to talk about McDonald's and then talk about the mall and keep referring back to those two ideas. Of course, there can also be 3 or 4 or 5 ideas. You're going to use your non-dominant hand turned back toward you for the list. This way your dominant hand will point and can keep talking. Now there's some variation in the fingering of these. Some people will use the old ASL numbers, 1, 2, 3, and then they get to 4, and some will do this, and some will go to 4. Some use the new numbers, so they'll do 2, they'll do usually 1, although sometimes you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's variation, so be prepared to see that variation in how you move down the list. Generally, however, you're starting at the thumb and you move downward. If you're going to be listing siblings, which is a common use of this if you're talking about your family, you start with your oldest, move down and include yourself. That's just something that deaf culture does. They include themselves when they're talking about siblings, and they start with the oldest and move down. So that's another idea of a way you can connect ideas, especially if you're going to be referring back to those ideas.